My name is Emma Foster. I'm 29 years old. And the moment my mother lifted her wine glass that Thanksgiving, I knew she wasn't about to say grace. She was about to make me the entertainment. To my biggest regret, she said, smiling like she was doing something clever instead of cruel. My 29-year-old daughter, who still can't afford rent. The table exploded. Silverware clinked. People laughed too fast, and someone actually started clapping before she even sat down. My father leaned back in his chair and added, "We should have stopped at 2 kids." More laughter. Then a male voice from farther down the table cut through the noise loud enough to make sure I heard every word. "Glad our kids won't turn out like her." That got the ugliest laugh of the night. An uncle I hadn't even spoken to in months shook his head and smirked. "You were such a promising baby. What happened?" I remember staring at my plate because I knew if I looked up too soon, they'd see exactly how much it hurt. And I refused to give them that. I took one more bite, set down my fork, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and finally looked around the room. Every face wore that same expression people get when they think humiliation is harmless, because it isn't happening to them. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "By Christmas," I said, "you'll all be begging for my forgiveness." That made them laugh even harder. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was being dramatic. They thought I'd do what I always did. Go quiet, come back, and accept my place as the family punchline. They were wrong. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out of that house, and why my phone showed 86 missed calls a month later, tell me what time it is for you right now. And where are you watching from? I'm honestly curious to see how far this story will travel. I didn't cry in the driveway. I didn't wait until I got home either. I made it almost all the way through taking off my boots in my tiny studio apartment before it hit me. The humiliation, the anger, the old familiar exhaustion of being hurt by people who would swear they loved me 5 minutes later. The worst part wasn't even what they said. It was how easy it was for them. How practiced. Like I had been playing this role for so many years that none of them even noticed anymore. When the joke crossed into cruelty, my phone started buzzing before I'd even taken off my coat. First my mother, then my father, then my sister, then my younger brother, who hadn't said a word at dinner but suddenly wanted to play peacemaker from a safe distance. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate itself tired on the counter. The next morning there were voicemails. My mother's came first, syrupy and offended at the same time. "Emma, don't be ridiculous. It was a joke. Everybody was joking." My father's was somehow worse. "You know how your mother gets. Don't make this into some big family drama." My sister's message sounded irritated, not sorry. "Seriously, you stormed out over that? You embarrassed Mom." I listened to that one twice because I needed the reminder. Because a small part of me, the part they had trained my whole life, still wanted to wonder if maybe I really was overreacting. Then my uncle texted, "Can we all calm down? It was Thanksgiving, not a funeral." That line almost made me laugh. Calm down. As if cruelty became harmless when served with turkey and pie. I spent that Friday at work in the city archives basement, wearing nitrile gloves and repairing the torn edge of a 100-year-old property ledger, while my phone kept lighting up beside a dehumidifier. My job never sounded impressive when I described it at family events. I restored fragile public records, digitized handwritten documents, stabilized maps damaged by moisture, and documented chain of custody files for historical collections. To my family, that translated into "you play with old paper for low pay." They never understood that I loved the work because damaged things made sense to me. Records could be cleaned, flattened, reinforced, preserved. Their history could be honored without pretending the damage never happened. People were harder, especially family. By Saturday afternoon, the messages shifted in tone. No one was apologizing to me. They were starting to fight each other. My brother texted, "Mom's blaming Rachel for laughing." My sister texted, "Dad says Mark went too far and made it look bad." My mother texted, "You know your uncle always ruins things." Their unity lasted less than 24 hours once the target stopped showing up. That was the first consequence of my silence. Without me sitting there absorbing it, all that meanness had nowhere to go but sideways. Sunday night, my father left a voicemail that began with "Sweetheart" and ended with "Please call me back." That one almost broke me, not because I believed him, but because I knew exactly what that softer tone meant. It didn't mean he understood. It meant he was uncomfortable. My pain had finally become inconvenient enough to matter. A question kept circling my mind as I sat alone at my little kitchen table, reheating soup and ignoring the blinking light on my phone. Why is it that the people who hurt you the most are always shocked when you stop helping them feel good about themselves? They wanted me wounded but polite, humiliated but still reachable, hurt but available. I was done with that version of me. So I did something I had never done before. I blocked the family group chat. I turned off read receipts. I told work I'd be taking extra hours through December. And that night, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started writing down everything I had never said out loud. The first thing I wrote wasn't angry. That surprised me. I thought rage would come pouring out, but what showed up instead was clarity. I wrote about what it feels like to become the family benchmark for failure. I wrote about holiday dinners where every question is really a comparison. I wrote about how some families don't need to scream to make one child feel small. They do it with jokes, glances, nicknames, and that disappointed little smile meant to remind you that you almost became someone they could brag about. I didn't use names. I didn't mention Thanksgiving. I titled it, "When Your Family Needs You to Stay Small So Their Story Still Works." Then I posted it on a small personal essay site I'd been too afraid to use under my own name. I expected a dozen views, maybe 20. Instead, by Monday night, it had been shared hundreds of times. People I had never met left comments that felt like tiny lifelines. One woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one whose family turned humiliation into tradition." Another said, "This felt like reading my own diary." For the first time in years, I didn't feel crazy. I didn't feel too sensitive. I felt seen. That mattered more than I can explain. At work, I threw myself into a certification project my supervisor had been nudging me toward for months. The city was expanding funding for preservation and records access, and there was an opening coming in January for a lead technician role with better pay, benefits, and actual recognition. I had hesitated before because the voice in my head still sounded too much like my mother. Don't aim too high. Don't embarrass yourself. But after Thanksgiving, something in me hardened into resolve. I stopped asking whether I was ready and started acting like I belonged in the room. My best friend, Julia Hayes, noticed the shift before I said anything. Julia was a public library outreach coordinator, the kind of person who could make a folding chair and bad coffee feel like safety. She showed up at my apartment on the second Sunday of December with a paper bag full of takeout, and one look at my face told her everything. "They did it again," she said. Not a question, a diagnosis. I told her all of it. The toast, the laughter, the way even my silence had been treated like a tantrum. She listened without interrupting, then asked the question no one in my family had ever asked me. "What do you want to happen now?" Not what should happen. Not what would keep the peace. What did I want? I didn't know at first. Then I admitted something I had barely let myself think. I want one holiday in my life where I don't have to audition for basic respect. Julia nodded like that was the most reasonable sentence in the world. Then build one. So I did. I picked up more shifts. I met with my supervisor about the January opening. I updated my resume. I kept writing. And on a gray Wednesday afternoon, while I was humidifying a box of brittle zoning maps, I got a call from an attorney named Margaret Chin. She represented the estate of my grandfather, Walter Foster. My grandfather had died in early spring, while the rest of the family attended the funeral and argued over who got his watch. I had spent weekends the year before helping him sort decades of business records from the old Foster hardware building he'd owned downtown. He used to say I had patience for history, What he meant was that I was the only one who listened without checking my phone. I thought the call was about some leftover document, maybe a missing inventory ledger or deed copy. It wasn't. There's a trust administration meeting scheduled for next week, she told me. There are items your grandfather specifically directed me to discuss with you in person. With me, not the family me. I remember standing there in the archive lab, one gloved hand still holding a soft brush over a century-old map, thinking about all the times my grandfather had said, "People show you what they think you're worth when no one's keeping score." At the time, I thought he meant patience or manners or work ethic. I didn't realize he was warning me. That night, I opened my laptop again and wrote a single line at the bottom of my new essay draft. If the people closest to you only value you when you stay breakable, then healing will look like betrayal to them. I didn't post that one yet. I saved it. Something told me I'd need it soon. The trust meeting took place in a quiet law office downtown with fake greenery in the waiting room and a bowl of peppermints no one touched. I almost didn't go. Not because I wasn't curious, but because I knew if my family was there, they would find a way to make me regret showing up. I was right about the second part. My mother looked genuinely startled when I walked into the conference room. Not pleased, startled. My father's jaw tightened. My sister Rachel wouldn't quite meet my eyes. And her husband Mark gave me that familiar half-smirk people wear when they think they're still above you. Even while sitting in a lawyer's office. My Uncle Glenn actually muttered, "Well, she came," like I had crashed something instead of being named in the official notice. Attorney Chen didn't waste time. My grandfather's estate had already distributed most personal effects months earlier, but one major asset remained. The old Foster hardware building downtown, now leased to 3 small businesses, plus a reserve account attached to it and several boxes of business records with historic valuation. The building, she explained, had been placed in a trust before his death. The trustee wasn't my father. It wasn't my uncle. It wasn't the family collectively. It was me. No one even tried to hide their reactions. My mother turned all the way toward me. My father actually laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound like the lawyer had made an embarrassing joke. Mark finally spoke. "There has to be some mistake." There wasn't. Attorney Chen continued in the same calm tone. The trust generated rental income. The property had appreciated significantly. There was enough value, if leveraged or sold under the trustee's authority, to cover several financial problems my family had apparently assumed would solve themselves by Christmas. That was when the room changed temperature. Until then, I had only suspected my family wanted something. In that moment, I understood exactly how much. My father's event rental company had overexpanded during the summer and taken on debt. Rachel and Mark's custom children's boutique was behind on a business loan. My Uncle Glenn had borrowed against equipment he no longer fully owned. They hadn't been calling me nonstop because they felt bad. They had been calling because they expected Grandpa's property to rescue them. And the one person standing between them and that rescue was the daughter they had turned into a punchline over turkey. Then came the part that explained everything. Attorney Chen slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Walter left a letter for Emma to read privately first," she said, "but he did authorize me to summarize the legal standard. The trust gave me sole discretion over whether any descendant would receive assistance from the reserve account or proceeds from the building. There were no automatic disbursements. None. My grandfather had written that he wanted the property managed by the one member of this family who has never confused cruelty with honesty." Mark stopped smirking. Rachel went pale. My mother started crying almost instantly, which would have moved me if I hadn't watched her weaponize tears my entire life. My father leaned forward and said the most revealing thing he could have said. "Emma, sweetheart, obviously we all need to talk about this as a family." As a family. That phrase again. Family when they wanted access. Sensitive when I objected. Dramatic when I hurt. Family when they needed a signature. I took the letter home before I opened it. I wanted privacy for whatever my grandfather had chosen to say to me. I made tea, sat at the little table by my window, and unfolded 3 pages written in his thick, slanted handwriting. He wrote that he had seen more than I thought. He wrote that every family has one person expected to absorb the damage, so everyone else can feel decent. And he was sorry he hadn't protected me better while he was alive. He wrote that being underestimated had sharpened me, but it had also cost me peace, and he hoped this gift would buy some of that peace back. Then came the line that undid me. You are not required to save people who would not have saved your dignity. I cried then, hard. Not because of the money or the building or even the trust. Because someone had finally named what had happened to me without minimizing it. The next morning, the missed calls started for real. Dad. Hey sweetheart. Please pick up. I didn't mean any of that. We were all out of line. Mom, crying so hard her words blurred together. I was just joking. We'll always be family. Rachel. Emma, this isn't funny anymore. We need to talk. Mark, who had never called me directly in his life. Can you at least hear us out? By the end of the day, I had 86 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and enough text messages to prove my grandfather had been right. Their respect arrived attached to an asset report. I didn't answer any of them. Rachel was the first one who realized apologies through voicemail weren't working. She texted 3 words on a Thursday morning. Please meet me. Not mom wants, not dad says. Just please. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a diner halfway between our neighborhoods. A place neutral enough that nobody could stage manage the scene. She looked terrible when she walked in. Not movie terrible, real terrible. Concealer over puffy eyes, hair done too fast, shoulders pulled tight like she'd spent days bracing for impact. For a minute, seeing her like that almost made me forget Thanksgiving. Then I remembered the sound of her laughing. We ordered coffee. We barely touched it. Rachel stared at the table and started with the line I'd expected. I'm sorry. I said nothing, so she kept going. No, I mean it. I'm really sorry. Still nothing. Finally, she looked up. Mom is falling apart. That almost made me stand up and leave. Rachel, I said quietly, if this conversation is about managing Mom's feelings, I'm done. She flinched. Then, to my surprise, she nodded. Okay, fair. She took a breath. Then I'll tell you the truth. What came out over the next 20 minutes was uglier than I'd imagined, and somehow less surprising. My parents had known for months that Grandpa's building might be the only thing standing between them and serious financial fallout. My father had assumed he would inherit control automatically. Mark had pushed the joke at Thanksgiving because he was angry and scared and wanted someone lower in the family hierarchy to absorb the tension. My mother, according to Rachel, had been drinking before dinner and decided that humiliating me would lighten the mood. Rachel admitted she laughed because when our mother turned on someone else, the safest place to stand was beside her. Then came the part that finally made Rachel sound honest instead of strategic. Mom told me to come here, she said, twisting her napkin until it nearly tore. She said if I didn't fix this with you, I shouldn't expect any help from them when the boutique closes. There it was. The whole system in one sentence. Loyalty purchased with fear. Affection rationed out based on usefulness. Even now, even with everyone panicking, my mother was still turning daughters into bargaining chips. I asked Rachel one question. If Grandpa hadn't made me trustee, would any of you be apologizing right now? Her silence answered before she did. Then she whispered, not like this. That hurt more than the laughter. Not because I didn't know it, but because hearing it out loud made denial impossible. Rachel started crying. Not theatrically, not angrily, just the tired, ashamed kind of crying people do when they can't protect the version of themselves they've been pretending to be. She told me Mark had already started blaming her for not keeping the peace at Thanksgiving. She told me Dad was furious at Grandpa for rewriting the family order from the grave. She told me Mom had called me ungrateful one minute and our only hope the next. She said relatives had started reading my essay, because yes, someone had recognized the family in it even without names. And now cousins and aunts were texting questions no one in the house wanted to answer. That detail landed harder than I expected. I hadn't posted the essay as revenge. I posted it because I needed somewhere truthful to put the pain. But truth has a way of sounding specific to the people who are guilty. Are you trying to punish us? Rachel finally asked. I looked at her for a long time. No, I said. I'm trying to stop volunteering for punishment. We sat in silence after that. For once, there was nothing performative left to say. When the check came, Rachel reached for it automatically. I paid before she could. Not because I wanted to prove a point, because I was tired of being treated like the sister who always needed something. At the door, she touched my sleeve and said, I don't know how to fix this. I believed her. You don't fix years in one coffee, I said. You tell the truth, then you live differently. That weekend, the family requests became more desperate, more direct, and less disguised. My father sent spreadsheets. My mother sent Bible verses. Mark sent a message explaining business cash flow, like I was an investor he could charm. Uncle Glenn called twice and left one furious voicemail accusing me of letting power go to my head. Which was a remarkable thing to say to someone you were also begging for help. I ignored them all and spent Sunday morning reviewing trust documents with Attorney Chun. I asked what my legal responsibilities were. She explained them carefully. I was obligated to act in the trust's best interest, not in the emotional interest of adults who had mistaken access for entitlement. My grandfather had structured it that way on purpose. On my way home, I bought a small artificial Christmas tree for my apartment. It fit on a milk crate by the window. I strung warm white lights on it and sat on the floor when I was done, looking at it in the dark. No grand centerpiece, no performance, just quiet. And for the first time in years, quiet felt more festive than family. 3 days before Christmas, my mother sent a message so different from her earlier ones that I knew someone had helped her write it. We would appreciate one conversation. No pressure. Just to hear you. That no pressure did more work than the rest of the sentence. I almost deleted it. Instead, I replied with a place and time. Their house, daytime, 1 hour, no alcohol, no surprise guests, and Attorney Chun copied on any discussion of the trust. Afterward, my father responded with a thumbs-up emoji, like we were finalizing a lunch reservation instead of dismantling a family myth. I went because I wanted one thing they had never freely given me. A room where the truth had to stay in the air after it was spoken. When I walked in, nobody was holding a drink. Good. My brother Jason was there, quiet and pale. Rachel was there without Mark. My uncle wasn't invited, which told me even my parents had limits when desperation got serious. My mother stood up too fast and immediately started crying. I'm sorry, she said before I'd even taken off my coat. I'm so sorry. I didn't say it was okay. I sat down. For the first 15 minutes, they did what families like mine always do when finally cornered by consequences. They apologized in vague, sweeping language that made pain sound like weather. Mistakes were made. Feelings were hurt. Things got out of hand. My father said, "You know we love you." My mother said, "You've always taken things deeper than we mean them." Rachel said, "We're all under stress." Every sentence floated around the point without touching it, so I forced it to land. "No," I said. "Say what happened." Silence. I looked at my mother. "What did you say at Thanksgiving?" Her face crumpled. "Emma, say it." She whispered the toast back to me, almost word for word. Except now it sounded ugly even to her. I looked at my father. "What did you add?" He stared at the carpet, then muttered, "We should have stopped at 2 kids." I turned to Rachel. "What did Mark say?" She shut her eyes. That he was glad his kids wouldn't turn out like you. Jason started crying then. Actual tears. He said, "I should have said something." That was the first honest sentence anyone had spoken all afternoon. My mother tried to recover the room by saying, "We never meant for you to leave us over one dinner." And there it was again. The reduction, the revision, the desperate urge to make years of damage sound like one bad holiday moment. This isn't about one dinner, I said. It's about a lifetime of teaching me that my value in this family was how well I tolerated disrespect. Thanksgiving was just the first time I stopped cooperating. No one argued because there was nothing left to argue with. Then my father made his mistake. So what now, he asked. Are you really going to destroy the family over this building? I had expected manipulation, but the bluntness still stunned me. Not are we beyond repair? Not what do you need from us? The building. The money. At least he saved me time. I reached into my bag and took out a copy of my grandfather's letter, the section I had chosen to share. I read aloud the line that mattered most. You are not required to save people who would not have saved your dignity. When I finished, no one spoke for several seconds. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked like someone had slapped him. For once, my grandfather was in the room louder than all of them. I am not distributing trust funds to any of you, I said. Not now. Maybe not ever. The building will remain in trust. The income will be managed responsibly. I'll decide later whether any portion goes to community preservation work in Grandpa's name, but it will not be used to reward people who laughed while I was being humiliated. My mother started sobbing. My father stood up and paced. Rachel just stared at me like she was seeing a language she'd heard before but never understood. Then my mother said the line Julia had predicted someone in my family would eventually use. If you cut us off like this, she cried, I don't even know what reason I have left to celebrate Christmas. The old Emma would have folded under that. The old Emma would have rushed to comfort the person who hurt her. But I had spent a month rebuilding myself out of truth. And truth is stronger than guilt once you've practiced it enough. Then maybe this is the year you learn the difference between celebration and performance, I said. That was the moment the room changed. Not because I won, not because they were fixed, but because for the first time I was not negotiating against my own self-respect. I stood, put my coat back on, and gave them the only terms I was willing to offer. If you want a relationship with me in the future, it will have nothing to do with the trust. It will start with accountability. No jokes about my finances, my work, my apartment, my life. No using me as a target at gatherings. No calling me too sensitive when I object. If any of that happens again, I leave immediately. No debate. Rachel nodded first. Jason nodded second. My father said nothing. My mother whispered, Please don't go. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw not just my mother, but a woman who had spent years mistaking dominance for closeness, and was now shocked that one of her children had stepped outside the system. I'm already gone from the version of this family that needed me to stay small, I said. What happens next is up to all of you. Then I left. On Christmas Eve I stayed home. That sentence would have sounded tragic to me a year earlier. It sounded peaceful now. I made baked ziti from a recipe Julia texted me. Burned the first batch of garlic bread because I got distracted answering comments under my latest essay. I sat cross-legged on my couch wearing thick socks while my little tree blinked in the corner. Outside, someone in the building across from mine had blue lights around their balcony. A couple on the sidewalk argued softly over which pie to bring upstairs. Somewhere down the hall, a kid was laughing. It wasn't a perfect Christmas. It was a quiet one. And quiet, I had learned, was not the same thing as lonely. My phone buzzed a few times that evening. I let most of it sit. One message was from Jason. A photo of him and Rachel eating store-bought cookies at their kitchen island because, according to his caption, Mom canceled dinner and Dad's pretending to watch football, but really he's staring at the ceiling. Another was from Julia. Proud of you. Save me leftovers. Attorney Chen sent a short note confirming the trust paperwork had been filed exactly as directed, and that no emergency access requests would bypass my authority. Clean, professional, final. Then, just after 8 p.m., my mother sent the message I think she should have sent first. Not please answer, not we're family, not it was a joke, just this. I finally understand that I raised you to accept less kindness than you deserved. I am ashamed of that. I don't expect tonight to fix anything. I stared at it for a long time. A few minutes later, my father sent one too. He didn't ask for money. He didn't defend himself. He wrote, "Your grandfather was right about one thing. We confused being hard on you with being honest." I don't know when that became normal, but it did. I'm sorry. Were those messages enough? No. Not for what they'd done. Not for the years behind it. But they were more truthful than anything they'd said in the frantic month before. Maybe desperation had finally burned through performance. Maybe consequences had done what pleading never could. Or maybe this was just the first crack in a wall that should have broken years ago. I didn't romanticize it. I didn't call it healing. I called it a beginning. And even that felt generous. I opened my laptop and wrote one last essay before midnight. Not for revenge, not to expose anyone, but to mark the moment. I wrote that forgiveness and reunion are not synonyms. I wrote that some of us are taught to think love means enduring humiliation with good manners. And that unlearning that can feel like grief because you are not just losing people. You are losing the fantasy that they were ever going to become safe without consequences. I wrote that boundaries are not cruelty. Silence is not pettiness. Distance is not betrayal when distance is the first place your nervous system has ever learned to unclench. Then I wrote the truest sentence I had found all year. Family is not defined by who shares your table. Family is defined by who would never use your pain as the centerpiece. Before posting it, I added one more paragraph about my grandfather. I wrote that he had left me more than a building. He had left me proof. Proof that someone had seen me accurately. Proof that being underestimated by the wrong people did not make me worthless. Proof that compassion without boundaries turns into permission for mistreatment. In January, I decided part of the trust income would fund a small public preservation grant in his name for local apprentices learning archival and restoration work. Something useful, something lasting, something built from care instead of guilt. Around 10:30 p.m., Rachel called. I almost let it ring out. Instead, I answered. She didn't launch into panic this time. She just said, "I wanted to hear your voice and make sure you were okay." "I'm okay," I said. She was quiet, then admitted that Christmas dinner had collapsed before it started. Dad and Mark had argued. Mom cried in the pantry. Uncle Glenn had called to complain that no one was speaking to him after relatives connected the dots from my essay. Rachel said, almost laughing at the absurdity of it, "Everything feels different now." "It is different now," I told her. She asked if I hated them. I thought about that seriously before I answered. "No," I said. "But I'm done protecting everyone from the consequences of how they treated me." She cried a little, softly this time. Then she said she understood, and for the first time in my life, I believed she might actually be telling the truth. When we hung up, I looked around my apartment. The second-hand bookshelf, the chipped mug by the sink, the stack of exam prep notes for the promotion I planned to earn, the little lit tree beside the window. Nothing about the room looked impressive. My family would still call it small, temporary, not enough. But it was mine. And inside that tiny space, I felt something I had never felt at any holiday table in that big loud house. Dignity. That was the real ending. Not the trust, not the missed calls, not the panic in their voices when they realized I was no longer reachable on old terms. The real ending was that I finally understood something people like my mother count on you never learning. That your peace is more valuable than your role in someone else's cruel version of family harmony. So yes, 1 month after my mother mocked me at Thanksgiving, they begged me to answer. But the question that mattered wasn't whether I picked up the phone. It was whether I would pick up the old version of myself again. The one who apologized for being hurt, who stayed seated through humiliation, who kept confusing access with love. And the answer, finally, was no. I can forgive without funding dysfunction. I can care without returning to the same cage. I can love people and still refuse the version of love that asks me to shrink, so everyone else can feel tall. That Christmas, I didn't get a miracle. I got something better. Clarity, boundaries, A future that no longer depended on being chosen by people who only noticed my worth when it cost them something to ignore it. And I want to leave you with this. If the people closest to you only seem comfortable when you are quiet, ashamed, or easy to mock, then walking away is not the cruelest thing in the room. Sometimes it's the first honest thing. Tell me in the comments. Would you have answered the phone? Or would you have protected your peace too? From my perspective, this story is not really about revenge in the usual sense. It is about a woman finally realizing that protecting her peace is not selfish. It is necessary. What makes this story powerful is that Emma did not scream, beg, or try to prove her worth. She simply stopped allowing people to treat her pain like entertainment. That quiet strength made the outcome even more satisfying. Sometimes the strongest response is not anger, but clarity and boundaries. What about you? If you were in Emma's place, would you answer the phone and give your family another chance? Or would you choose to protect your peace?